Today's speaker is Barby Ulmer. She and her husband Vic were the founders and co-directors of the organization Our Developing World. It was formed in 1982, a nonprofit organization which strives to raise awareness of the struggles and triumphs occurring in developing countries by creating resources for teachers, hosting events, and leading educational trips to Central America, Southeast Asia, and Africa. With the focus on Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala, she will provide a brief historical background of U.S. policy toward these countries, exploitation by U.S. and Canadian corporations, recent struggles and victories, and what can be done. Welcome, Barbie. Please come and share your information with us.
Thank you. Let me just give you a little intro.
Go up there, otherwise.
No, I know, but first I'm going to introduce this.
I guess. Okay.
What I've done is bring real things from Central America. Actually, there are three things from Nicaragua, and the rest of the hand-woven cotton and recycled newspaper, and all of this is from Guatemala. And I will be showing some slides. In fact, I don't want this to continue. Well, that's all right. I'll figure it out. The reason I bring back crafts is that I can tell stories about the people who make them and try to bring us together and make the world a smaller place so that we will care. And I've found that beautiful things made by hand do that, so that's why I bring them. This recycled paper, bowls and plates and earrings and bracelets and so forth, are made by disabled people in Guatemala, teens and older. The reason that they're making this is because the founders of this center, and it's very rare to have centers for disabled in poor countries, they asked the parents, what is your greatest concern? What would your greatest concern be if you had a disabled child?
Work.
Safety.
Sorry?
Safety.
Safety, okay. Any other thing?
Work, meaningful work.
Meaningful work, why?
So that they would feel like valued members of society.
And they'd be able to take care of themselves when the parents died. And that was the universal reply. So they started a workshop so that the disabled there could make a little money. And there are now, and it's just wonderful to see them working. It's laborious. It takes a long time to make these things. But they are so happy because they are learning skills that will earn them some money. And there are now 11 entrepreneurs who are disabled who have their own little stalls in the market. So it's a win-win. The hand-woven cloth, like the blouse that I'm wearing that I made out of a piece of material, is hand-woven cotton. It can be washed in the machine, flapped on cold and gentle, flapped, hung on a hanger, never touch it with an iron. I have one that I bought the material in 1970. It hasn't faded a bit. The only thing that's happened is it's gotten softer. So I bring these things to bring the people to you. And the consumable fair trade, is there anybody who doesn't know what fair trade is? I would be very surprised in this group if there were. But the coffee, the decaf, comes from Nicaragua and El Salvador. Café Justicia comes from San Lucas de Toliman in Lake Atitlan, and I hand carried it to get it up here. Palestinian olive oil. The chocolate comes from via Ghana. Women's cooperatives in Ghana sell the coffee beans to a fair trade German chocolate factory. They are part owners of that factory. So it's really a win-win. I visited fair trade cooperatives. It makes a huge difference. The children are wearing shoes, they have schools, they have clinics, all because the villagers decided that's what they needed. So it's really a win-win. Everything that's fair trade tastes much better, just knowing it. I'm leading 2 trips next year. Please pick up a flyer if you'd be interested. The focus is on people and development. A week in Cuba, a week in Nicaragua, compare and contrast. And then I'm going back to Lake Atitlan because it was such an incredible experience, and I will show you slides later about that, so you'll have a little preview. These are resources that I use to keep myself up to date because things happen and I want to stay current. It would take too long to show you slides about El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Honduras, so I brought display boards. Let's see if I can get this. Okay. This is the view from the terrace dining room in Lake Atitlan at Hotel Toliman, where we stay. Just being there is relaxing. It's just amazing. Okay. Some of you are probably aware that all of Latin America was colonized by Spain. All 4 of these countries have indigenous populations, and they also have African ancestors of slaves who fled from Jamaica and other of the Caribbean islands. The U.S. policy toward Central America was manifest destiny. In other words, we know best what you need, and we'll come and make sure you have it, which translates to more profits for U.S. companies. It has nothing to do with helping the people. The aid that we've given to Central America is mostly military. And sometimes we've manipulated the currency. We dollarized El Salvador. Vic and I were there just after it had been dollarized. We went into a little pupuseria, and while we were enjoying our pupusas, we asked the owner what dollarization meant to him, and he said, hardly anybody can afford to buy pupusas anymore because we don't have access to dollars. The government can't issue dollars. They can only come from the U.S. And the exchange rate for the local currency is minuscule. So that really started the downhill of the economy of El Salvador, and it's very, very complicated. Arena left them, they said, a clean house when the FMLN came in to govern. Well, what it really meant was cleaned out. They not only left no money in the treasury, they left loans that they hadn't used for the reason they had gotten the loans, and they depleted everything. They changed the pension system so that in 3 years there was nothing left to pay the people who were already retired, and on and on and on. We didn't. The U.S. government fostered wars in El Salvador, a civil war, because we funded the military. And Arena used that money against the people. In Guatemala, we funded General Rios Montt. I don't know if all of you know that he was converted to a born-again Christian by a group in Eureka. Chati, who is a very dear friend who runs this hotel, she's actually a lawyer, but she's not practicing now. Chati's family were friends of the Montt family. And because she was married to a man in agricultural development, which was the reason for farmers doing better and better and getting yields so they didn't have to take their 11-year-old sons, 11 and older, down to the plantations to harvest coffee or cotton. The large plantation owners targeted the Mayans. And Chati and Rolando had to leave along with some of the farmers. They either had to go underground or flee. Chati and Rolando and the family lived in Mexico for a while, in Nochitlan, and then in Valle de Angeles in Honduras. And when Rios Montt came into power, Chati asked a brother of his who was a bishop if it was safe to come home. And the bishop said, and this is about his own brother, "I'm not suggesting to any of my priests to come back. It's dangerous." So this is the man that we helped bring to power in Guatemala. In Nicaragua, all of you know about the Contra War. And we used Honduras to stage that. Ambassadors tried to get the people to vote against the Sandinistas. And the Sandinistas are not perfect by any means, but they were helping people in many ways. There's more electrification, there are more cooperatives, and so forth. Finally, an ambassador said to the people, and it wasn't hacking, it was blatant. If you don't vote for the Sandinistas, we'll end the Contra War. And we were visiting Batahola Norte neighborhood, where we had visited many times before. This was a neighborhood who had housing that was either provided by the Sandinistas or the materials to build the houses were provided. They were staunch supporters of the Sandinistas. But I wasn't at all surprised that they would vote against them because they were so tired of war and so afraid that they would lose more sons. So it was no surprise to me that Chamorro was elected, thanks to our ambassador. The Sandinistas were elected again after her term was over. And this was a family that was very much divided, which you find in many families, well, like Rios Montt and the rest of his family. I don't understand how they're divided. The Cardinals were also divided, but that's a reality. In Salvador, during the war, many young, especially men, fled to the U.S. They didn't have families, they didn't have friends, so that they were susceptible to being recruited for gangs. And they were very active gang members. Then when the United States government deported them back to Salvador, they brought their gangs with them. And this has added violence to El Salvador. There's also violence by the opposition to the government and big business. And essentially, the economics of Central America in terms of U.S. policy is to foster U.S. corporations, to privatize as much as possible, and to put that privatization in the hands of U.S. companies. The wealthy in El Salvador pay very, very little taxes. Sound familiar?
Yes.
And the poor are paying their share. In Honduras, this was a family, a country unlike the other three, where demonstrations were common. But in Honduras, when we first went there in '83, there was a little demonstration every Thursday or Friday, I can't remember which, in front of the presidential plaza by the people who were involved in the Committee for the Detained and Disappeared. Some of you may know Zenaida Velasquez. She was one of the co-founders when her brother was disappeared, and she went around to all of the prisons and the military to try to find out what had happened to him. It was so gruesome when she found out decades later that I'm not going to tell you exactly what happened to him, but it was horrible. There were maybe 8 or 10 women who were demonstrating. Every time we went there, that was it. The Hondurans just weren't demonstrating people. When the U.S. was complicit in the coup of 2009, ousting President Zelaya, who was a conservative, large landowner, who had somehow realized that the poor needed help, and he was making changes that poor people told us about. The party that he belonged to didn't like that at all. And so they, with the U.S. government, were complicit in ousting him at rifle point and bayonet in his pajamas to Pomarola. which was a U.S. air base. If the United States government had not wanted that to happen, they could have stopped it right there. Vic and I heard on the radio President Obama saying, there's been a military coup, and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton saying, no, there's been a coup. What's the difference? The difference is, under our laws, if it's a military coup, we had to remove all of our embassy staff and warn all Americans to leave the country, freeze all assets of anybody involved in the coup, and not provide any military aid. But because Obama agreed to Hillary's description, that wasn't done. And we supported the unfair elections of the people who were involved in the coup and still are. We continue to give military aid to Honduras. The unemployment rate is horrendous now. Gangs have fostered fear. This is why we have people from Central America, not Nicaragua, but from Guatemala, a few from Nicaragua, but Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, big time, coming to the United States to flee the violence. And parents even urging kids because they are so fearful that they're going to die. So it's our foreign policy that is fostering this. Now, we have pressured Mexico not to let them in to Mexico, much less over the border. And so the numbers coming over the border have decreased tremendously, but the problem is still there. Imagine if all the money for military had gone to education and health care. What a difference. What a difference. In all four countries, the indigenous are the ones who have taken the lead in trying to protect the environment. And certainly they're very active here. By and large, in all four countries, U.S. and Canadian firms want to build dams, want to have mines to extract the resources. And you probably know about Berta Cáceres, who was a lead environmentalist, a member of the Lenca indigenous group, who was killed. But she is one of many who were killed before and after. We have increased the number of U.S. bases in Honduras, and they have not added anything positive. In Guatemala, the courts are beginning to do some good things. In addition to finding Rios Montt guilty, they have, and some of his generals, they have released protesters who haven't been charged, but they were protesting a dam that a Canadian firm wanted to build. And the court released them, no charges, dropped the charges. So it's good to find a few successes to help people go on. Very recently, a law was passed in El Salvador that metal mining was prohibited. This is a huge step, and you can imagine that US and Canadian firms are not happy about that. Climate change has struck Central America even more than here because they're closer to the equator. And their coffee has had more difficulty, and this is a major export of all of the Central American countries. But because of using more sustainable agricultural methods, some of them are surviving, especially the smaller farms. So, what can we do? Oh, one more thing. In Nicaragua, 52.9% of people in government are women. Imagine that. We're way behind. This is only matched by France and Belgium. So we can learn things from poor countries. Sometimes they have solutions that work for them that might work for us. So what can we do? The U.S. budget is going to be discussed, hopefully, in Congress soon. We can pressure not just our own legislators, but friends who live in non-blue states to pressure their elected officials to minimize military aid, to make sure that trade not only has provisions for human and environmental protection, but also eliminates the ability of corporations to sue government entities, whether it be a city or a state or the nation, for expected profits that were prohibited by local laws. Who dreamt this up? I'll never know, but this has happened, and it doesn't make any sense. And I don't expect it to happen under this administration, but hopefully diplomats will be trained to let people make their own decisions in terms of elections, instead of pressuring them the way our ambassadors have done in these countries. Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador. I hope that you will look at these display boards and see some of the struggles and some of the positives and the resources here that I use to keep myself up to date. Okay, now
Tap it every once in a while.
Oh.
It's going to shut both of them.
Okay. Now I'd like to take you to Lake Atitlan in Guatemala briefly. This has been my very favorite tour of any that I've led since 1974. It is so relaxing just to be there. And Chati gives benefits to her staff and pays them, and that's really not done in Guatemala, and pays them decently. So they're just eager for us to be there, very kind, very helpful. And Chati knows so many people that she opens up all kinds of doors for us. So I look forward to going back. There's a Mayan garden on the hotel grounds from which all of the vegetables and fruit and herbs are used for the meals that we eat there. And Jose is the major gardener. You can see the circles. Mayans use circles. And they, instead of, I don't know if that's my phone, I apologize if it is. They use jars around the circles. And when you walk on the path, some of the herbs have grown over the path, and the aroma is so lovely. And he grows seedlings for the garden, more of the grounds, lots of birds and squirrels. And here is the entrance into the dining area. We visit the coffee plantation and processing plant, where the green Cafe Justicia comes from, and they transplant these and then sell the trees to local farmers, where they get their coffee beans. I had no idea how intensive harvesting coffee is. They have to let it dry, and they have to constantly rake it so that it dries evenly, and then put in these sacks that are huge. I mean, these men are really strong. Here is, I think this is San Juan, San Antonio across the lake. And no, that must have been San Juan, because this is where I had the coffee, and I just thought the way they decorated the coffee with the cream was so nice. And the murals in San Juan, many of them are old, but do you remember in 2012, we were told that the Mayans thought that the world was coming to an end at the end of that year? Well, no. They felt that it was the end of an era. And in 2013, it was the beginning of the era. And there are new murals now, and they focus on women. And a woman was elected to the council of all of the villages around the lake to deal with women's issues. And she really opened up doors for us. You see murals on schools and walls, and they're all about the culture. And a new one, security of food. All of the work that they do. And we had Josue taking us around explaining the murals so that we could understand the context, which was a real treat. Here's a school gym, and there are murals all around. So the kids grow up learning the culture. And this is Olga, who opened up all kinds of doors. She's the one who was elected to deal with women's issues, and she's standing in front of this wonderful mural. All of the different activities that they do to sustain themselves. Obviously, being around a lake, they fish. And there is an ancient city under that lake. And they're having some of the same problems that we have here in California. Nestle gets free water from Shasta. They once had a contract, but that expired a long time ago, and we haven't. Our government has never stopped them. Well, I don't know whether it was the mayor of San Lucas or somebody else gave permission to a company to take 1 million gallons a week out of the lake. So the lake is getting lower. I don't know if they're making any progress to stop that. You can see corn in many of these murals. They feel they're the people of the corn. Again, very hard workers. Leanne is here with her partner. Leanne does the facilitating when we're in Santiago, and that's where Adisa is. And she's, again, she knows everybody, so she does a wonderful job. And will again. She was down there for many years and learned a lot about the Mayan religion and was very comfortable in it. And when she was back visiting her mother in the States, somebody from the congregation called and said, "Leanne, you have a home here with us. We want you to come back." And so she is now, I guess, an ordained deacon, something like that. Anyway, she knows all of the rituals and, in fact, participated in the Mayan wedding ceremony that Chati's son had at Hotel Toliman. This is the elementary school at Adisa, the Center for the Disabled. It is so lively, so colorful. They do a lot of music and art. I don't know anybody who wouldn't be delighted to be there. And here are the earrings that Adisa made for me, starting with, they had loops or circle earrings, and I asked, could you put a peace sign in that? And so they made some. And then the next time I came, I said, could you do a teardrop with a peace sign? And they made some. I have a few over there. And next July, when I go back, I'm going to email them first and ask if they can do a heart earring with the peace sign in it. David, who was there, is the happiest teenager I've ever met. He is not strong enough to lift himself up to a wheelchair. So the staff put the word out to the whole community, not just the disabled community, the whole community of Santiago. And a man designed and made a scooter for him that's about this long, about maybe 12 inches wide, and this high from the ground. He can lift himself up with wheels. on both ends. He can go up and down all the streets of Santiago. He is totally liberated. You can imagine he's one happy camper. Here's Olga with the mayor. I had sprained my ankle in Santiago, so that's why I'm in a wheelchair. The mayor of Sololá with some of his colleagues and 2 other people in our group. Olga got this appointment for us so we could learn what the Mayan System of Justice is. Do I have time to explain this? It'll only take 2 minutes. The Mayan System of Justice.
5 minutes.
Oh, good, good. The Mayan System of Justice is, it was explained to us by the mayor with an example of somebody who had stolen a stove from a family. So the elders got everybody involved, both the perpetrator and the family, and any neighbors or friends who had seen what was going on, got them together and said, what can we do to make this right? Well, the first thing was return the stove, obviously. There are a number of questions that I'm going to ask next time, but I didn't ask, why did he steal the stove? Did he need a stove, or did he need money that he would get from selling the stove? I don't know that, but I'll find out next time, and maybe some of you will be with me and find out too. Then they said to the perpetrator, what kind of community service could you do to help the community? They didn't say, you're doing community service, this is what you're going to do. They asked him what skills he had that would be helpful to the community. When he chose something, he was introduced to somebody who would help him and would supervise him. When he had completed that community service, they didn't say, you can't have subsidized housing, you can't vote, you can't, which we do, even with people who do community service. But then they said, what organization or church would you be comfortable working with so they can help you change your behavior so you never steal again? So he chose. And when he was finished with this, there were no retributions in the community because everybody knew that he had gone through this process and he wasn't going to do it again. And they supported that. Does this make sense? Now, I didn't ask, what if somebody killed somebody? I mean, I asked it, and they said, well, he probably would go to prison, but I don't know the steps toward that. A gringo, you know what a gringo is. That's us, non-Guatemalans, who lives down there permanently, had a problem. I don't know what the problem was. I'm going to find out. He had gone through the Ladino system of justice that's in the Constitution. And it had been going on for years, and there was no solution. So he finally went to the elders and said, you know, this is what's happened. Nothing's happening in this justice system. Can you help? And they said, sure. It'll take a couple of meetings, and, you know, we'll see what we can do. Well, they solved it. And he was so happy that he went to the main plaza in the village he lived in when he knew there would be the most people there, and he said in the loudest voice he could, "Thank you, thank you, thank you, elders, for solving my problem with your system of justice." So that's the Mayan system of justice. Questions?
Yes. In order to record the... Please wait for the microphone before asking questions. When you have the microphone, remember to hold it close to your mouth. Also, please identify yourself before asking your question. Now, before I do that, I'd like to add an addendum to the speaker's talk. If you want to read about the depredations of this country upon Central America, this is a real good book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman, The Shocking Inside Story of How America Really Took Over the World by John Perkins. It's a real shocking account. Yeah, so. All right. Hey. Okay.
I have a question that's always bothered me. First off, where do all these dictators come from? Now, it could be from greed, the military, and this sort of thing, but it isn't only Central America, it's all over the planet. Wherever you go, there are dictators, and they all have a substantial following, which I would like to have explained. and the following are their own people. And the enemy of the dictators is their own people. Now, I understand Costa Rica is a little bit different. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Do you have an explanation of why I understand Costa Rica doesn't have a military?
Exactly. You're absolutely right.
So if you can, is this in the genes of these people who follow dictators? We have Adolf Trump, by the way.
I think you know the answer to this. What do we aid? We aid the military. So consequently, the military is powerful in these countries. And it's and our ambassadors and our whole DC approach is to aid the military.
But Costa Rica does not have...
Costa Rica doesn't have a military, so we can't do that.
How is it that they are so different from the other countries?
Because they don't have a military and haven't had for a long time.
Well, why don't they have a military?
I guess there were a lot of us down there, a lot of Costa Ricans who didn't want a military. I can't explain that.
They do want a military?
They don't.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, I think so too. We can learn from them.
Hi.
We haven't.
Rob, let's go to the question at the back here.
Okay, there's another question. Thanks.
Hi, thank you. I found it enlightening, and thank you for sharing some of
you're
this
welcome.
information about particularly the support of military dictators and military aid, and the complicity of our highest elected officials in supporting and continuing that. To continue on that idea, are you familiar or have any thoughts about military aid to other parts of the world? As you know, the largest recipients are Israel and Egypt, and they're both oppressing indigenous people.
We have at least 800 military bases around the world in 80 countries. That is a huge portion of our budget. My feeling is, very strong feeling, that that's making enemies, not friends, for us. It just maintains the bad that we've been supporting all along.
That's why I'm looking forward to kicking off.
Well, that's why we have to be on top of the discussion of the U.S. budget. Because they've already not been able to, the Pentagon has not been able to find money that they were given. It's just disappeared. I think they know where it is, but they're not telling us. But, you know, the more we feed that budget, the more this kind of foreign policy is going to continue. There's a song that we sang last night at a granny's gathering. I'm not a granny, but I was there. Last night I had the strangest dream. I never dreamed before. I learned the world had all agreed to put an end to war. That's what we've got to work for. And it starts with money.
I grew up in the Panama Canal Zone, where the School of the Americas was. It trained dictators for Latin America. Almost every major military dictator in Latin America was trained by the U.S. in Panama.
Exactly.
And the combination of that school and the policies of John Foster Dulles and the Eisenhower administration pushing the United Fruit Company throughout Central America was really the major movement in terms of supporting dictators. In Guatemala in 1955, there was a democratically elected government and overthrown with the complicity of the United States. So we, as you have really said before and accurately, you know, it's our commercial as well as military policies, and it's really much easier to manipulate a dictator than it is to manipulate a whole populace. So, one question that pops in my mind, 1961, I drove from Michigan to Panama with no consideration of safety whatsoever. And when I think about doing that today, I think I'll just get knocked off by someone in a drug cartel. What is your sense of safety, and would you make a trip like that today?
Well, I don't think I'd drive through Mexico. The violence in Guatemala is in the capital, but around Lake Atitlan, And you know, in Santiago de Atitlan, there was a military base. One of the places we visit is the Peace Park. The military base soldiers used to go out of the base and raid the village homes and rape the daughters. And finally, they went to the church, which we'll also visit, and rang the bells. That was the signal for everybody to come. And then they marched from the church to the garrison to say to the comandante, don't let your soldiers out. Enough is enough. Before he could say, don't fire, the soldiers had fired and killed 13 people. And Jose Adedisa was one of those who was injured. Now that area is a peace park, and there are monuments where each of the 13 were killed. And in the peace agreement, it said the military is never allowed to come back to Santiago de Atitlan, and they don't. So, a little hope.
Hi, Barbie. My name is Paul Gilbert. First, just a comment about the percentage of women in national parliaments.
As of-
Nicaragua.
in Nicaragua,
Yeah.
you commented on as they were third. As of a couple of years ago, the U.S. ranked 57th in the world, putting us down with some of the anti-women governments in the Middle East. But back to the main topic of your talk. I came to California in 1983, got acquainted with CISPIS, the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador, which I've contributed to regularly since then. What are other organizations that are effective, either in direct aid to the people of these four countries? What organizations could we look to support lobbying, our own government or businesses? Who are the national voices, either political or in journalism, that we can look to for good information? And would you provide some information to Jim and Fran Naylor, our Social Action Committee?
Sure.
To help us to be effective in helping.
These are resources that right here that I use to keep myself updated. NISQA is information about Guatemala. I also donate to CISPIS, and I knew some of the staff very well, but one of them has gone back to school. She's gone to law school. And Contra in Nicaragua has friends of Contra here and in Europe as well to help them. They are a Nicaraguan nonprofit that does popular education, which is helping communities figure out what their major concerns are and how to bring those into reality. And it's at Contra that we stay when we're in Nicaragua. They have a lovely conference ground, and we get to hear more of the work they do and visit some of their projects, plus other projects as well. So the Friends of Contra is an excellent source to help Nicaraguans. Salvador, I help Radio Victoria in Victoria, Salvador. They were a publicly sponsored, like KPFA, radio station all during the war, and they continue to bring real news, and they have volunteer reporters out in the community so that people have a voice and others can hear them. So that's one thing. And then what is Brenda's called? Oh, I can't think of it. But she has a rehab center, and she works training young people to be able to work with other young people to help them understand the disaster of AIDS, to let them learn how to prevent teenage pregnancies, and also to do rehab work, massage, and so forth. And I can't, oh, Brenda, you're going to hate me. I can't remember what her organization is called, but I have some cards. And also, if you're interested in the tours, my contact information is there. Let's see, Honduras. Certainly in the environmental group, and then Committee for the Detained and Disappeared. It's such a horrendous situation there. See, I talked about Nicaragua, Guatemala. Nisqua.
Maybe the important thing is to make sure that you're in contact with Fran and Jim to get those, and we can disseminate them. I don't want to take up all the rest of the time when others want to ask the question.
Well, actually, time is up.
The fellow here in the blue shirt, almost to be bald-headed. Yeah, he had his hand up sometime ago.
2 minutes left.
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk and raising our awareness about the situation there. You mentioned the Iran-Contra affair. Could you comment on what the impact of the Iran-Contra affair was on Nicaragua or Central America in general?
Well, it funded the Contra War, which was disastrous. And it stopped. I mean, the Contras targeted anybody who was helping the poor people. So, you know, I can't think of his name, but the mechanical engineer who went to Nicaragua to Ben Linder to help them, thank you, build small hydroelectric dams. He was targeted and killed, but his family, just like Rachel Corrie's family, picked up the mantle and continued his work, and they're working all over the world. So as Heather's mother said, you can't kill her, you've magnified her. So this is what's happened, but it's a shame that it has to happen that way.
Thank you for your presentation and for answering our questions.
You're welcome. In poor countries, when people give a presentation and the audience applauds, the presenter applauds too, because if you weren't here, I couldn't do it. Thank you very much.